What if I told you that some of the most urgent geopolitical stories unfolding right now are not actually the ones dominating your newsfeed? Think about it carefully. When was the last time you heard a serious, sustained discussion about Venezuela? Not a passing headline, not a quick mention in a news ticker, but a deep conversation about U.S. pressure on Nicolas Maduro's government, the ongoing sanctions, the indictments, the diplomatic standoff, and the economic collapse affecting millions of people. Now compare that silence to how often you've heard about Greenland in recent weeks, about whether the United States should or could acquire it, about tensions with Denmark, about rare earth minerals, about military positioning in the Arctic. One of these stories involves decades of documented economic pressure, legal indictments against a sitting head of state, a humanitarian crisis, and the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. The other involves a legally implausible territorial acquisition that would require overturning international agreements and potentially provoking conflict with NATO allies. And yet, it's the second story that dominates the conversation. This isn't about conspiracy, it's about attention. In geopolitics, attention is currency. What gets discussed shapes what gets questioned. What gets questioned shapes what gets challenged, and what fades from view often continues without resistance. Stay with me through this entire video. We're going to walk through real documented history. We'll examine the long, calculated relationship between the United States and Venezuela. We'll talk about oil, power, currency, and control. And toward the end, I'll present a theory, not a claim of fact, not an accusation, but a pattern worth thinking about. Because history shows us that power doesn't always operate in the spotlight. Sometimes the loudest conversations exist to keep your focus away from quieter, more consequential ones. Let's begin. To understand what's happening now, we have to go back decades. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, over 300 billion barrels. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than any other nation on Earth. For most of the 20th century, this made Venezuela critically important to the United States. American oil companies operated extensively there. Venezuelan oil flowed north. Profits flowed back through American and European corporations. But oil is not just energy. Oil is power. Oil shapes the global economic system itself. In 1971, the United States abandoned the gold standard. The dollar was no longer backed by physical gold. Instead, it became a fiat currency, its value based on trust, stability, and global use. But the U.S. didn't leave this to chance. In 1974, the United States reached a deal with Saudi Arabia. Oil, the most traded commodity on Earth, would be priced and sold in U.S. dollars. Other oil-producing nations followed. This created what we now call the petrodollar system. Here's why this matters. Any country that needs oil needs dollars. To get dollars, countries must trade with the United States or hold U.S. reserves. This creates constant global demand for the dollar, allowing the United States to run deficits, print currency, and maintain economic leverage unmatched in modern history, control the oil trade, and you influence the global financial system. Venezuela's oil, therefore, isn't just about fuel. It's about currency dominance. It's about leverage. It's about who shapes the rules of global trade. For decades, this system worked smoothly, until 1999. That year, Hugo Chavez became president of Venezuela. Chavez believed Venezuela's oil wealth should benefit Venezuelans, not foreign corporations. He nationalized the oil industry. He redirected profits towards social programs. He openly challenged U.S. influence in Latin America. More importantly, he began selling oil to countries outside the U.S. sphere, Cuba, China, Russia, and in some cases accepted payment in non-dollar currencies. From a geopolitical perspective, this was not ideological rebellion. It was a structural challenge to U.S. economic power. The United States responded with pressure, diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, support for opposition movements. In 2002, a coup briefly removed Chavez from power. He returned within 48 hours. The U.S. denied involvement, but later documents showed American officials had prior knowledge and met with coup leaders. Chavez remained in power until his death in 2013. When he died, Nicolas Maduro took over. Maduro inherited a fragile system. Under his leadership, collapse accelerated. Hyperinflation reached staggering levels. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Food shortages became widespread. Millions of Venezuelans fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the Western Hemisphere. The United States intensified pressure. Sanctions targeted oil exports, finances, and officials. In 2019, the U.S. recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate president. Then in March 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Nicolás Maduro on narco-terrorism charges, alleging cooperation with drug trafficking networks. A reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. Maduro rejected the charges, calling them a pretext for regime change. Today, Maduro remains in power, supported by Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba. Venezuela's economy remains shattered. Oil production has collapsed. Yet Venezuela still holds the world's largest oil reserves. And despite all of this, how often do you hear Venezuela discussed now? This is where the theory begins. What follows is not a claim of fact, it is a speculative interpretation of observable patterns. As U.S. pressure on Venezuela continues, sanctions, indictments, economic isolation, public discussion has largely vanished. At the same time, attention has shifted sharply toward Greenland. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It is not for sale. Denmark has said this repeatedly. Greenland's leaders have said the same. For the United States to acquire Greenland would require political agreements that do not exist, or force that would trigger international catastrophe. A military takeover would mean conflict with a NATO ally and potentially global escalation. Yet Greenland dominates headlines. It is framed as urgent, strategic, pressing. Greenland has resources, rare earth minerals, Arctic positioning, but the United States already benefits from Greenland militarily without owning it. So the question arises, why does an almost impossible scenario dominate public conversation while a real, ongoing geopolitical pressure campaign fades quietly into the background? Public attention is limited. News cycles move quickly. Governments understand this. If attention is redirected, scrutiny fades. This isn't new. During political scandals, military actions have coincided elsewhere. During major wars, other humanitarian crises disappear from coverage. This is not about morality, it's about mechanics. Venezuela remains under sanctions. Maduro remains indicted. The humanitarian crisis continues. Millions remain displaced, yet public attention has moved on. This theory does not claim certainty. It suggests a pattern, that dramatic, unlikely stories can dominate attention, while quieter, long-term strategies continue without resistance. Greenland may never change hands. Venezuela, however, continues to be shaped every day. So the real question is not whether this theory is true. The question is whether attention itself is being guided. What do you think? Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep paying attention.